Hello and welcome to this edition of the GIS Report. I'm your host, Information Officer Feliza Fenty for the Ministry of Natural Resources and Labor. You may notice that the pesky Sargassum seaweed has invaded our shores, the coasts of our neighbors, and maybe even your back door. Our territory is hosting a Sargassum conference soon to address issues to do with the special seaweed. Here to talk to us about the opportunities, suggestions, and the Sargassum conference in general is our Honorable Deputy Premier and Minister for Natural Resources and Labor, Dr. the Honorable Kedrick Pickering. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, we'll just begin by asking why are we having the Sargassum conference for those who may not know that sargassum exists or is an issue?
Well, to begin with, Ms. Fenty, the Sargassum seaweed, as most of us will be aware, created some huge problems for us last year. And in doing the research related to the Sargassum seaweed, we realized that it was not just a local problem, it was a regional problem, and in some ways, even a major international issue. In collaborating with our local and regional colleagues on the issue, we realized that all of us share the same fundamental problem in trying to understand the nature of the seaweed, from whence it was coming, and what could we expect with respect to it in the short, medium to long term.
Right.
It is that type of collaboration that led us to realize that we all were in this boat together. And hence, there has to be some regional-wide approach to deal with the issue and therefore to find solutions that can best serve not only us locally, but within the wider Caribbean and Caribbean Basin region. As a result of those collaborations, discussions emanated from various areas. And I discovered from a conversation with His Excellency the Governor that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, in association with the University of West Indies, were planning a Sargassum Seaweed Conference to be held in Barbados around the same time this year. We had already initiated similar discussions with the private sector to host a similar conference. And so we initiated a dialogue between ourselves and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to see how we could coordinate our efforts to best be able to utilize the resources that were available to us. And out of those discussions, we have now arrived at where we are in hosting this conference, which will be hosted in the British Virgin Islands next week, the 21st and the 22nd of March.
Right. Wow. So, sargassum seaweed, it seems to be a pesky problem, like the word pesky. It seems to be a little bit of a problem. And as an onlooker, you might think that just technical persons may be dealing with this, but however, we have decided to host this conference at a ministerial level. And I want to ask you about that in particular. This is a regional initiative, and how many ministers are expected to attend throughout the region?
Well, it is a ministerial meeting, but what we've tried to achieve at this conference is to bring together a combination of public and private sector,
right? Okay.
along with policy, academics, and business leaders,
Okay.
to bring together the best available information and knowledge that we can then concretize some ideas to be able to deal with the wider problem. What we've discovered is that nobody have the answer. And although we all agree that it is a phenomenon related to climate change, to the whole issue of global warming, none of us have been able to put our finger on the pulse as to exactly what are the real triggering mechanisms. What are the major contributing factors apart from we know it is climate change? How can we then approach solutions to the problem? And so the private sector and the public sector are coming together under the auspices of this conference to bring some of the best minds who are doing research, who are working in the field on a regular basis, along with the policymakers. One of the major outcomes we would hope is that with a better understanding of the issue, it will then inform us as ministers on the policies that are necessary to be able to make the right decisions to counteract the problem as we move forward.
Right. Okay. With that said, I have to ask as well, besides the government of the Virgin Islands, who else is hosting the conference that's coming up?
The major sponsors are the government of the British Virgin Islands, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office of the United Kingdom government, Virgin Unite, which is a branch of Sir Richard Branson's international foundations, the Caribbean Council, which is a non-profit organization that brings together public and private sector individuals working specifically within the field of environmental sustainability and protection. Those are the four major sponsors of this event. And the conference is being held on Mosquito Island.
Right.
And the participants will begin arriving from Sunday evening. It will be a full one and a half days conference. And in a more relaxed setting, so that we could really sort of trash out the issue and find some practical solutions and ideas to the problem, because it has become a fairly major problem for the entire Caribbean.
Right. Okay. I was wondering at the same time, will this event become an annual thing, or will it just be a one-time thing? Does it depend on the outcomes of this event, this particular festival?
Well, at this point in time, we don't foresee it becoming an annual event. What we anticipate is that the discussions will create ideas and possible solutions to work on. And when these get back to the technical persons who are working in the field, then we anticipate the developments that will see an unfolding of what came out of the conference. And we hope, this is certainly one of our big hope, is that one of the outcomes would be a concrete way to deal with the seaweed.
Right.
Whether we remove it from, before it gets to the coast, whether we remove it when it hit the seashore, how do we utilize it in a business arena, in a scientific way. There's a big talk about it being useful as a tool for farmers. These are the sort of discussions that we will have.
Right.
And so we don't anticipate this being a annual event. Of course, we anticipate there'll be follow-up events and discussions that will then be focused on specific aspects of the discussions that came out of this broader discussion.
Okay. Not to switch gears just a little bit, you mentioned climate change earlier being possibly one of the causes, or the main cause, of the seaweed and the seaweed's volume in terms of it reaching the Caribbean region. We have a climate change adaptation policy in the Virgin Islands. Does that address any factors concerning the seaweed or surrounding the seaweed?
Well, the climate change adaptation policy is a broad framework to be able to guide discussions and greater implementation of the various policies with regards to the environmental agenda.
Okay.
The environmental issues have been driven in large part over the last couple of years by climate change. Because you would recall, Ms. Fenty, that there was a major international conference held in Paris in early December that was specifically looking at how to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. And so over the last several years, the majority of discussions and the major conferences with respect to environment were leading up towards Paris 2015, because that was the big hope. That was the big melting pot, so to speak, because everyone recognized, first and foremost, that there was no plan B with respect to climate change. It was either we got it right or we would lose the game, wrong. Because the warming of the planet, the rising of sea levels, the melting of the glaciers, these things are very real phenomena. And unless the countries of the world, especially the major CO2 producing countries, came together in a forum to make a decision to say, well, we all have to take responsibility to reduce the greenhouse gases that are being emitted. Unless that decision was taken, then we all were just paddling against the tide. And it was only a matter of time before we see the destructive effects of climate change. And so conferences like the Sargassum Seaweed Conference that we are hosting next week are part and parcel of the wider agenda with respect to climate change, dealing with specific events.
Right.
The bigger issues were dealt with in Paris. And so all countries have to look at the areas that most affect them and try to find ways to reduce the effects on our various countries.
Right.
A quick flashback would reveal that the beaches of the Caribbean basin were inundated with the Sargassum seaweed, and it made them almost unusable.
Right.
And it is those events that have guided these discussions leading up to the conference, and so we hope to have a much clearer understanding and approach to be able to deal with the issues when they come forward again.
Right. I guess I take from that you're saying that the seaweed really is a symptom of the whole climate change issue.
That is very correct. You know, it is exactly that, a symptom of the wider problem.
Right. Okay.
And to appreciate that is what is important. And so conferences like these help to focus a greater attention on the wider issue of climate change as it affects the islands of the Caribbean. So it is so important that it is worth repeating. The majority of Caribbean countries depend on tourism for a livelihood. And our coast, our coastal regions are intimate and integral to our tourism product. Our harbors, our beaches, sailing, snorkeling, swimming. And so we've got to do whatever we can to mitigate and reduce the effects of the Sargassum seaweed, bearing in mind that it is a part of a bigger problem, as you rightfully pointed out, a symptom of a greater underlying issue.
Do you anticipate any policy changes or policy coming out of the conference, especially for the Virgin Islands, particularly for
Yes and no, because it to preempt the discussions and say that I expect or anticipate major policy change would be to say that I know what will come out of the conference.
Oh, right.
And if I knew that, then there wouldn't be any reason for hosting the conference. But certainly if there's information that is revealed to us that is of relevance to our decision-making process, and that then determine that we need to shift our policy direction, then of course we will look at that. Whatever the outcomes of the conference, it is important that it is of benefit to the lives of our people and the wider Caribbean region that is affected by the Sargassum seaweed.
Okay. With that said, we are just about out of time. I wanted to ask you, finally, if there's anything you want to tell our listeners and our viewers, finally, so that they can really understand why we're having such a huge conference and, why it is important, of course, to address this matter for those who may not understand.
I think it's important for us to emphasize the point that the cooperation between public and private enterprise is important if we're going to be able to tackle the issues, the major issues of the day. Government can't do it alone. Neither can government do everything. And wherever possible, it is important for the private sector and the government to collaborate and cooperate for the betterment of all. Because there's a saying that innovation is what drives is the engine of business, but also that the mother of necessity, how it goes again, the necessity is the mother of all invention. And so the Sargassum seaweed has created an opportunity for us to do just that and to see how we can find the solutions. And coming out of a conference like this, I'm sure there'll be some great business ideas that are generated. And so it's not only government that will be the beneficiary of the entire process, but the private sector also. And we would anticipate that there'll be local people themselves who might see good business opportunities that they can jump at and be able to then generate some means of income and job creation. And therefore, that's how the economy continues to thrive and put us and keep us on a path of sustainability.
Good. Thank you very much, Minister Pickering. And thank you for joining us today on the program.
Thank you for having me.
The issues surrounding the seaweed can be very complex and challenging, but the government of the Virgin Islands aims to address the matters in the most environmentally sound manner possible, ensuring long-term sustainability for our territory. For the ministry, I am Information Officer Feliza Fenty. Thanks for watching.